I'd like to call the open public work meeting to order, and we'll go to Dr. Whitney.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. You may recall during our last vision planning session, we had a number of items that we weren't able to complete during that meeting, and so at your request, we have added these items to various work sessions. This evening, we have three items that we want to talk about and share: performance-based assessment, strategies offered for success, and online opportunities. I'm going to call to the podium Mrs. Pam Connor, the Director of Elementary Leadership, to introduce our first presenter.
Hi, good evening. It's a pleasure tonight to share with you one of our initiatives that we've been working on for several years. Our supervisors are very involved in the performance-based assessment process. Katrina Carey, our supervisor of History and Social Sciences, is here and will be sharing with you the process of performance-based assessments. Katrina Carey.
And we do have the handout on page 1 of your packet.
All right. Good evening, Dr. Whitney, Chairman Dobransky, Vice Chairman Copeland, and school board members. Again, I am Katrina Carey, and I am the supervisor of social studies. And I'll be spending a few minutes actually talking to you about performance-based assessments. The areas of focus throughout this presentation include actually what are project-based assessments. We'll talk about the state-mandated initiative that spurred this process for us, as well as how we went about developing them, sharing some examples from our students from last year, the impact on student learning, and how we're going to move forward as we move through 16-17 and even 17-18. And then lastly, the professional development opportunities that we provide for our teachers as well as us as an SAO team always currently engage in and make sure that we're on top of what we need to know in order to make this successful for our district. All right, so I'm going to open actually with a little video, and hopefully you'll pay close attention because there is a really big important question afterwards.
Not a Box by Antoinette Fortes. To children everywhere sitting in a cardboard box. Why are you sitting in a box? It's not a box. What are you doing on top of that box? It's not a box. Why are you squirting a box? I said it's not a box. Now you're wearing a box? This is not a box. Are you still standing in that box? It's not a box. Well, what is it then? It's not a box.
So our question is, when we think about that video, what's the overarching theme? What message should we actually receive from that video?
It's not a box.
Well, of course not. It's not a box. But more importantly is that when we think about performance-based assessments, it's really that opportunity for students to not be confined to that box of a multiple choice test. In other words, there doesn't have to be a box. It gives them that opportunity to actually cultivate, create, explore, and do all the things that they may have talents with doing, but we don't always see that because of an ABCD multiple choice test. All right, there we go. All right, so when we think about performance-based assessments and what they are, there's still a strong focus on the standards of learning skills and the content. While we may not actually be asking them questions and asking them to circle an A, a B, or C, or a D, we are asking them to demonstrate their learning of the same SOLs, just in a different form and a different type of product. And those products can actually be anything from designing and constructing new inventions, writing persuasive editorials, giving oral presentations, which could be speeches, debates, creating and performing skits, and even developing and interpreting maps. And all of the examples that I listed here are actually examples of the things that we've had our students doing just this past year. And again, there's also the focus is always about mastering the performance or mastering the skills through performance outcomes. So it's not just about that one test. There's certainly a place or in a time for teachers to actually use those types of assessments, but this here gives the students an opportunity to broaden their horizons. All right, so a few years ago, I think during the 2013-14 school year, law was enacted to actually eliminate some of the SOL tests. The goal was to actually cause, of course, less stress on the student, but actually really hone in on the things that the students really need to show their mastery for through those assessments. What PBAs allow them to do, and where this initiative came from, is the state said, you know what, we need to find a way that we can actually make sure that the students are mastering this content. And what way can we do that? And that's kind of where this performance-based assessment initiative was born. So it's actually something that's happening across the state of Virginia, and all the districts are tasked with actually pushing these assessments, developing these assessments, and the 5 content areas listed in the PowerPoint. There are grade 3 history, grade 3 science, grade 5 writing, U.S. History 1, which in Suffolk we teach in 5th grade, and then U.S. History 2, which we teach in 6th grade. So in these 5 specific content areas, each division has been tasked with developing performance-based assessments. To prepare divisions for this new initiative, this move toward performance-based assessments, each region was awarded a grant by the Virginia Department of Education. That grant actually allowed each region to put together, coordinate professional development for regional teams. Our regional team actually consisted of the 3 content supervisors that were affected, so the supervisor of social studies, supervisor of English, supervisor of science, as well as the specialists in those content areas. And we also included some gifted resource teachers on the team, because what better group of folks to actually deal and help us with performance-based assessments than our gifted resource teachers. So together with Mr. Edwards, we actually attended several trainings through the course of 2014-15 so that we could prepare to do this. The training went from everything from how to design rubrics to what the foundation of a performance assessment should be like, what we needed to make sure we kept in mind as we're designing these for students. And then from the teacher aspect, how we could actually implement this and cause less stress for our teachers, as it's a new initiative and we want to create that buy-in. So we've actually received intensive training through that regional grant. Once we received our training, we actually came back and started developing our PBAs. So we also had to now pull in a new team of folks. So in addition to the people that I mentioned before, we actually, during our summer curriculum, put together a team of teachers, media specialists, supervisors, instructional specialists, you name it. We had all kinds of teachers actually working with us to develop these, because that way we could actually have the input from those who are actually teaching it in the classroom or have taught it, those who actually have access to resources that we may not have access to, and it also gave us different perspectives on how to approach it and how it looks. So we actually trained that group of folks and then started to develop the PBAs that we actually have in effect now. Part of the training we received had us use a specific way to design the performance-based assessments, and we followed Jay McTighe's GRASP model. And, you know, there's an acronym in education for everything, so this is no different. And the way that I remember the GRASP model is I actually equate it with the analogy of a hand. So if you hold your hand up high, you can actually go through each letter. So I always think of the thumb as the G, and that G stands for goal. Because what is the goal of the performance-based assessment? What are the students ultimately going to be able to do? Your index finger is actually the R. So in achieving that goal, what will the student's role be? Because a lot of times with the performance-based assessments, there's actually a situation or a scenario that the student is actually going to be involved in where they have to take a role. The A is for audience. Who's going to be that audience that that student is addressing the situation to or with? And then your ring finger is your situation. Oops. Let me see if I can do this. There we go. Situation. So what is the situation here? What is this scenario? For instance, in one of our U.S. History 2 PBAs, the scenario is that they actually are a museum curator, and they've been tasked with making an exhibit about the changing role in America from the Reconstruction era to the Cold War. And so they have to put themselves in the situation where they have to figure out, how am I going to put this together? So that's their situation. And then the P, your pinky, That's for the product, or in some instances, the performance, if it's a skit or something of that nature. And that's the final outcome that's going to demonstrate that they actually understood those SOLs, that they mastered them. And then I always close the hand and I reach out and I grasp back in, hence the grasp model, because the S is for your standards piece. And that's the criteria that the teachers are using to actually measure the student's understanding. And that's typically done by a rubric. So at the end of all that, when you get to that last letter, that S, you're pulling it back in, because at that point, they should be able to definitely demonstrate what they know, and they're able to measure that with the rubric based on the criteria for the performance-based assessment. All right, so what happened there? I bought some examples for you. And I don't know if we can pass them around, but I definitely have them here. These, I guess the boards might be a little tough to pass around, but I have several. The grade 3 example is actually an example where the students had to create their own classroom government. But not only did they have to create their own government, they actually had to go back to what they learned about Greece and Mali and actually make their government similar to one of those particular areas. And then they had to explain why it was the same, and they had to come up with goals, consequences, expectations, and then they actually had to pitch it and present it to the class, and the class could actually vote on which one would be the best one. We also have one from grade 5 science. That one is the first 9 weeks PBA as well, where it's on simple machines, and the students were faced with a real life situation where they actually had to think of an issue that they had, and then design an apparatus that would actually solve the problem for them. So the one that's being passed around is actually from a student who decided he didn't want to have to get up to turn on the projector. So he was going to design an apparatus that would allow him to reach the projector from his seat and turn it on.
Okay.
And then, of course, in U.S. History 1, which is grade 5 for us, Road to the Revolution, the 2 examples that you have up there come from 2 students actually who were at Pioneer last year. And the role of that one and the goal of that one, students had to actually put themselves in the role of an author and an illustrator, and they had to put together a children's book about the American Revolution, detailing the key events and characters. They had to create diary entries from different perspectives of the American Revolution, and they actually put that together as part of their second 9 weeks PBA. In grade 5 English, this one covers the course of 2 9 weeks, and it actually allows the students to become researchers. So they're engaging in informational text, and this one is integrated with science because they're also looking at ecosystems and how humans negatively or positively affect the ecosystems. And so the example of this one is actually right here. So the students have to do that process by the teachers, and they have to pull that information together and then pull together that paper of an expert. How can we address those issues? And so this spans, of course, the second. And then lastly, we have U.S. History 2, and that was on the changing role of America. With the U.S. History 2, we actually teach that as a semester course. So for that one, we decided the best way to do that was to not do one every 9 weeks, but to actually make that a semester-long performance-based assessment that has a theme to it. So when we looked at our SOLs, we felt like a common theme was change. So that one looks at the changing role of America. An example of one that's here, this one got a little wet, but this one actually has a student creating an exhibit that will museum curate. Analyze primary sources. One of our major skills in history is actually how to analyze primary and secondary sources. So this put the students in the situation where they had to look at those types of artifacts, research them, explain them, and then actually come up with a justification as to why they wanted them to be included in their exhibit. This is just one example of an exhibit a student did, but we had them do them in PowerPoints. Prezi, one teacher did hers in Google Classroom. So one thing that the PBAs also offer is that piece of choice. And these are just an example of some of what the outcomes can be, but we have everything from brochures to, again, simple machines, to research papers, to speeches. We've had students be tour guides, and they had to come up with an itinerary of taking the rest of the class on a tour through specific areas and regions. So one of the things that we often talk about is if we're going to implement something, then what's its impact on learning? And so when we do a little research, of course, we find that performance assessments affect learning as well as teaching. Students are more motivated to learn and are more engaged with project-based tasks than with other types of assignments. And I wanted to put that there because one of the other things the Social Studies Department actually did is at the end of the year, we actually asked the teachers for some feedback on PBAs. And one of the questions that I asked, the usual strengths, weakness, what can we do differently? But I wanted to know how they felt it impacted student learning. And so some of the things that they said is that by building student skills and experiences, PBAs challenge them to make meaningful connections and expand their knowledge. They commented on the fact that students were able to understand the topics instead of memorizing facts. It allowed students to see beyond primary source documents. Students could look beyond what they could see and make historically correct statements. It allows students to show what they knew about each skill and objective and not what they didn't know. And often they feel like with multiple choice tests, sometimes it shows more of what the student didn't know versus what they do. So professional development. Again, like I said earlier, whenever we have something new, of course there has to be professional development. And even once we get a firm grasp on it, we still need to make sure we're staying abreast of the current changes and things that are going along with it. So as an SAO instructional team, we always have follow-up Regional 2 training. In fact, just last spring, we actually had a rubric training in Virginia Beach, and there were on a Saturday, no less, and there were maybe approximately 7 or 8 people there. 5 of those were from Suffolk Public Schools. That's how serious we are about making sure that we're actually on top of this and we're getting as much training as we can so that we can bring this to our teachers the right way. We also have VDOE workshops and conferences. In fact, Mr. Edwards, Dr. Walsh, Ms. McGrath, myself, and Ms. Jackson actually just attended a conference on September 26th on assessing deeper learning that actually took us to where we're going next. And then content area consortiums. We all have consortiums within our content area that are constantly talking about, well, how are you implementing these? What are we doing? Can we share these? So we're always talking and networking with our colleagues, getting different ideas and saying, you know what, how can we improve upon this? Or we did this, or let's kind of trade ideas here, or let's meet together and actually brainstorm and come up with some things. As far as the teachers go, we have citywide meetings, we do school-based trainings, and we have workshops. And they are anything from how to administer the PBAs, how to actually score rubrics. In fact, one of our most popular pre-service session was actually a rubric training and how to actually use one of those to score the students' work. Developing performance tasks, because that's something that we don't have to wait for a district performance assessment to learn how to do quality performance tasks. That's something that a teacher can actually do in the room at any time. And then, of course, I mentioned school-based training, and that would be more based on what the school needs with the PBAs or a specific team needs within the school regarding the performance-based assessments. So as we move forward, when we were at the September 26th meeting, one of the things that was set forth was a new set of guidelines from the Virginia Board of Education regarding implementation. And some of the things that they shared with us was that by the 2016-17 school year, school divisions will be expected to use at least one performance assessment in classrooms where grade 3 science, grade 3 history, grade 5 writing, U.S. History 1, and U.S. History 2 are taught. Well, I'm proud to say that SPS or Suffolk Public Schools actually met that goal last school year. In grade 3 history, we had 3 performance assessments. In grade 3 science, we had 3 performance assessments. In U.S. History 1, 3 performance assessments. Grade 5 writing, 1 performance assessment. However, it expanded across 2 9-weeks. In grade 6 U.S. History 2, it was 1 performance assessment that expanded an entire first semester, and then when new students came in second semester, it went across the second semester as well. So we are actually ahead of the game in where the state wants us to be. So when we look at 17-18, according to the state guidelines, we actually should be at the point where we're ready to share examples across divisions. Well, one of the things that Region 2 actually did after getting that grant last year was not only did we train in terms of how to do it, but we also created a Region 2 bank of performance-based assessments where the divisions within Region 2 can actually access PBAs that other divisions put together. So we're actually ahead of that curve as a region as well, and just waiting for our opportunity to start doing that with the other regions across the state. And then lastly, that leads us to where we're going next. So our next steps include, but are not limited to, developing additional district performance-based assessments. This year with the performance-based assessments, we actually took the ones that we did last year and we made some adjustments and tweaks based on teacher feedback. What we didn't want to have happen is that we do it one time and then give the teachers something new. Last year was our first time doing it, and that was whenever there's something new, there's apprehension. So we wanted the teachers to get their feet wet, get grounded in it, and now that they're able to do it again, they're able to kind of pick up where they made some mistakes or want to tweak here and do those things. So we wanted to actually work within the same ones. So our next steps will be to develop additional ones as a district, but then also build the capacity in teachers to develop their own. And include other grade levels and content areas. For instance, this year, grade 2 math will have the opportunity to do performance assessments. Second 9 weeks will be an optional one, and fourth 9 weeks will actually be required. And that's going to involve students taking those math concepts and applying them to an actual real-world problem. I believe one of them actually deals with students having to plan a birthday party. So they have to think about fractions and all of those things, and their goal is to actually be able to show how they planned it and how they used math to do it. So I want to wrap up with about what it means to have time to be awesome. One of the things that I thought was really awesome at the retreat was that we had to talk about what our awesome would be for the school year. In fact, I actually wear a bracelet, and so does my specialist that actually has my awesome on it. My awesome was empowerment, and that's such a powerful word to me because empowerment to me means building capacity, building relationships, making connections. And so I wear this as a reminder as to what my awesome was going to be for this new school year. So I want to take an opportunity to share with you this video that lets us think about what our awesome is.
This is gonna be awesome.
Hey, good President.
What's up, kid president?
Our New Year's resolution
Is to be your #1 fan.
to talk gooder.
Make the world a better place, one step at a time.
And to watch more Kid President. Because I didn't really know you at first, but now I do.
And dance.
Happy New Year, pancake people! Now I got an idea, but it's a crazy one. What if we all made it a resolution to make this year awesome for somebody else? That'd be an awesome year! And we need this to happen, people. I mean, have you guys been watching the news? I'm traveling all around the world to tell people to make this awesome year. That'll make the world awesome! Right now, everybody's making resolutions. Like lose weight, get organized, stop typing in all caps. These are good, but we gotta get gooder. Kid President's Awesome Year starts now. Here's 25 ways you can make it awesome for somebody else. Smile, buy presents, write a song. You're awesome, totally awesome. Deal with it. Send a card every day for 365 days. Give somebody a cat. Let's say allergic. That'd be a little bit mean. Leave big tips. If somebody needs help them. Visit old people. But don't call them old people because, like that. Pay for somebody's groceries. Always be nice. High fives. Show somebody a picture. Wash your hands. Cupcakes for no reason at all. Write, produce, and star in a musical tribute to someone.
I dreamed a dream, it was about you. It was so beautiful.
Put down your phone. For more parties. Learn to say people's name correctly. Hello, Ray Williams.
Ray Williams.
It's Wilson.
5 billboards in the busiest place in town and dedicate it to your friend. Send people pizza. Open the door for people. Every room you enter, free hugs. Don't just favorite people's tweet, give them a retweet. Mail somebody a corn dog. More standing ovations. You watching this. Those are just a few ideas, but I need you to help me come up with more. What about you? How'd you make this world awesome for somebody else? Upload a video one lucky person could win. I'm gonna write a song for you, just for you, for one lucky person. Now next week, you'll meet our awesome year spokesperson. But first, I was supposed to do something. I don't remember what it was. Oh yeah, dance! See you next week. So pancake, subscribe.
So pancake, subscribe.
Corn dogs, they're so good.
And the whole point of that is that I go back to PBAs, and PBAs actually allow our students and our teachers to discover their awesome. So if you have any questions or comments?
I have a comment.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to make. It's really nice. I've talked about testing for many, many years, and it's really nice to see that people have finally realized at a level different from the classroom and at other levels, and are allowed to really do some critical thinking when it comes to these subjects, because these are definite demonstrations of children really thinking critically and doing something about it, and then also working collaboratively, because that's what business people are looking for, people who can work collaboratively, not necessarily fill in all the dots, all the bubbles. So thank you. This is really nice.
Thank you.
I like
And
this.
that's the thing that I think we love about it the most, is that it really taps into what we call our 21st century skills, or our real world skills. And when we look back to any of our content areas, that critical thinking piece is at the core of all of them. And those are, just not germane to how to do math or how to analyze a primary document. Those are skills that carry over into life. It's just done through a content area. And so that's the piece that I think I'm most excited about, and it was nice to get that feedback from the teachers, because we also got an opportunity for our teachers to make that connections and see that light bulb go off in our students.
I got to ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
Does it have any bearing on the type of student you have in the classroom, or does it relate to a general classroom, or does it? I'm talking about the critical thinking process, where different students think differently. Well, how about the low achiever? What role does that student play in critical thinking as compared with the high achiever?
What we end up doing is we actually do differentiate a lot of our performance-based assessments. And so the students, the outcomes can actually look different. And I think the type of outcome that's out there, for instance, we have one Explorers on Display, where the students can actually demonstrate their learning through a collage or a brochure, or they can actually do maps or do a report. So the idea of doing something different to show their mastery gives that student the opportunity to address their ways of thinking about it through that process, because we do want to make sure that some of our students who may have accommodations, or some of our students who are at a lower reading level or what have you, get that opportunity to show what they know. So it also allows the teacher to be flexible within that, knowing that he or she has choices that they can offer the student. Is that?
This is a new concept that we're bringing to our teachers, is that correct, in teaching?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
how are our principals being brought into this?
We've actually had discussions with the principal just recently at the retreat. One of the sessions that I actually did during our breakout groups was on performance-based assessments. So I spent some time talking with them about some of the information I shared with you, how they're developed, the GRASS model. We actually went back and looked at the facets of understanding in Bloom's taxonomy, so that they could see how all of that ties back to the instructional piece and how the teachers are teaching the SOLs in the classroom. So the principals are receiving training on it as well.
Hey, but this is only going to be taught in social studies, is that correct?
No, it's actually social study, grade 3 and 5 and grade 6 social studies. Grade 3 science is doing it right now, as well as grade 5 writing. Our next steps is to actually expand that into the other content areas, and we're actually working on doing some training with teachers right now on just what performance tasks look like. So they don't have to necessarily always be in the form of a big project-based assessment, but what a performance task can look like in their daily lessons.
I think that's all great and good, but then the principal have to be a major part of that because he's going to be the one who's observing and evaluating the teacher as if they're to their.
If I could add to that, absolutely. The principals receive the same type of professional development that teachers would receive on what it means, what it looks like, so that when they go into the classroom and they see students are working on the floor, they understand why they're working on the floor and what their objective is as well. What we have, it's interesting because this type of authentic assessment is not necessarily new, but it is a matter of, I think, the state endorsing it now, saying that this is an alternative way on assessing kids and one that is, in some cases, more appropriate for kids. I'm not so sure there is research to suggest that students who are more academically strong or the gifted student performs better than the student who is a weaker student. In fact, it might be evidence to suggest that that weaker student who does not do very well with the traditional assessment may be able to do well or better using this type of assessment because it's touching another modality that perhaps the paper pencil does not address. So it really is good teaching and good assessment, and it's a matter of making sure that we're reaching all learners. And I went into a classroom last year and saw this in place and asked a student a question just to check for understanding, and they responded as though I should have known the answer on simple machines, but they got it as opposed to just an answer in a paper pencil type assessment. So this is something that I think that we're moving in the right direction as far as the state is concerned, but we also have seen, I believe, that teachers are using this in other content areas that aren't necessarily supported by the state or state mandated because they believe in it. They believe in the philosophy that we need to have an alternative assessment for students. And it becomes, I think, a little more common and easier because they are used to doing it based on what's been mandated. I don't know if you've seen that.
I do, we do. And I also want to add, Dr. Dobransky, that the supervisors and specialists also conduct joint observations with the principals so that we're going in with them so they're able to see what we're seeing and actually debriefing afterwards to talk about what we're seeing and how that looks in an observation and what the expectations of the teachers and the students are.
Ms. Carey, I'd like to ask about resources to put together the outcomes. Are they provided, or does each student have to provide their own? Because there was a lot of difference in the projects I saw.
It is a lot of difference, and there are things that we actually purchase for the teachers, whether it's construction paper. Dr. Walsh and I actually just ordered a bunch of stuff and actually sent it out to the teachers. So we try to buy the things within reason that we can for the teachers to support the students, because when you're thinking about the amount of paper or the amount of resources that they need, it can be very costly. So one of the things we've been fortunate to do was provide teachers with as many as those, I'm tongue-tied, I'm sorry, many of those resources as we possibly can. We also, for some of them that have choice, like some of the students can build something and they can use, whether it's straws or popsicle sticks or paper towel rolls. That's a little bit more difficult to buy those for teachers because we don't know how much they need. So for the things that we know that we can quantify it and definitely give them, we do that. And then we also make sure that the performance-based assessments are in the buildings at the beginning of the 9 weeks so that we have time to find out, well, what else do you need and how can we support that?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We've looked at having IB early in elementary school, middle school. This right here is the same thing we do in IB. Well, we've done, I guess people are doing it now, in the IB class. The same way, you use your imagination, you perform accordingly. I think that's a program that will help us even with the IB program. But kids will be introduced to how to do critical thinking and the performance basis that we're asked here. It's real nice.
Thank you.
I like that.
Project-based learning, is it all in all this?
I'm sorry, say that again, sir.
Is it all project-based learning? Is it all going to be surrounded by a theme and a project? In other words, in social studies, is it going to be the Civil War and then the project of the Civil War, or?
All right, so for instance, with our grade 5, we actually have one each 9 weeks. So I think in first 9 weeks, we actually focus on the Explorers piece of it. So that one's Explorers on display. So the project actually surrounds specific SOLs that address that, along with the social studies skills that come along with it. Second 9 weeks in 5th grade, we have the American Revolution. I think you have those children's books there where the students are focused on those SOLs that deal specifically with the American Revolution. With U.S. History 2, we chose to do a theme because of the short time span that is taught within a semester. So there's multiple SOLs, but all the SOLs actually address that theme of change. So it's going to vary what that looks like, but they're all centered around specific SOLs.
There's a question I had. At the end of preparing a presentation, when they finish, do they get to present it to the class and explain it?
We do include oral presentations in some of our performance-based assessment because there's also a skill that's actually part of their English SOLs, and it's something that carries throughout from grades 4 all the way through 12. So we wanted to make sure, well, actually 3 through 12, I apologize. So we do include an oral presentation piece in it. For instance, for social studies, I think we don't do the oral presentation piece until third 9 weeks because they're still so young and little when they first start. But by the third 9 weeks, they're a little bit more comfortable, so we're starting to introduce that oral presentation piece. And then that carries forth, so forth and so on. So we do actually offer that in our performance-based assessments.
Will PBAs be used to expand the middle school curriculum, and will they also be used in high school?
Our U.S. History 2, we actually do teach in middle school, so we're actually doing that component in U.S. History 2. I think one of the things that we're focusing on in each content area, it goes back to the piece I talked about with performance task, so it doesn't always have to be a full-on project, but based on what you're teaching, what can the students do to demonstrate that, whether that's in a particular lesson over the course of a couple days or a big project that takes for a couple weeks. So in addition to PBAs, we're really honing in on that training so that that can be a part of the middle school and the high school and how to actually do those. So it goes back to understanding by design.
Seems like it would be a perfect skill to add to the middle school as we're looking at how we're going to restructure it.
I think when you look at Virginia's profile of a graduate, it includes some things such as that. When we were talking about redesigning the high school, it includes more critical thinking and problem-solving type things, and what better way to do it than to end with some type of project. Again, it doesn't have to be such an elaborate project, but it's a matter of describing exactly what it is that you're trying to solve or trying to create. Thank you, Ms. Carey.
Oh, thank you.
Next on the agenda, you can see we have strategies offered for success. I'm going to call Mrs. Diane Glover, our Director of Special Education, to introduce our next speaker who will present to you SOS intervention plans. And that presentation begins on page 9.
Good evening, Dr. Dobransky, Dr. Whitney, and school board members. Here in Suffolk, we have a process for interventions that support students with student concerns and struggling needs for behavior, as well as educational concerns, academic concerns. That process is called the SOS process, and as Ms. Carey said, we have an acronym for everything. The SOS process is actually stands for Strategies Offered for Success. And so if I shared any more information, I'd be going into the presentation. So I'm going to bring to the podium Ms. Jamila Silver. She is an educational diagnostician here in Suffolk Public Schools. She also is responsible for providing professional development division-wide on this process. Ms. Silver.
Dr. Dobransky, Dr. Whitney, board members, good evening. As introduced, I'm Jamila Silver, educational diagnostician. This year, I am assigned to Hill Point Elementary and Lakeland High School. I bring to you the Strategies Offered for Success program as a resource booklet is being passed out. This is not a new program. This has been around for over a decade, although we had to streamline and modify the program and really so it's more palatable to our parents and our staff when using it. It was a lot of paper before. We reduced that and we streamlined it so that we're in compliance with state regulations. If you would follow along with me in your booklet, on the first page you have the actual definition, but more specifically, the strategies offered for success is a building level problem solving team. That's it in a nutshell. And this team is utilized to solve any type of difficulty a student may be having, whether it's academic, behavioral, emotional. It can even be used for truancy, and now that we have graduation coaches, it most certainly can be implemented with this plan. Some of the core principles for the strategies offered for success, I'd like to highlight that this utilizes research-based strategies to address specific concerns, and it also encourages the frequent monitoring of the impact of those interventions. In a nutshell, just determining whether or not it's working and looking at it frequently so that you can make decisions about changes that need to be made throughout the year, not just once in the beginning and once in the end. The other thing that I want to stress is that the most important part of this program is clearly defining what the difficulty is. Oftentimes you get vague descriptions or general descriptions about what the issue is that a student may be having, and it shows up in a content area. But this really encourages you to, or teachers, or any professional working with the student, to define that problem so that we can research an intervention that will work, implement it, and measure it as we go along to determine whether or not it's working. Now, you may ask why there was such a resurgence of the SOS program. And back in 2013, the Special Education Department was audited by the state, and a few concerns were noted by the state. In response to that, several members of the Special Education Department attended conferences that was sponsored by the Virginia Department of Education. And from that, we also had to submit an improvement plan to basically outline how we're going to address those concerns. One of the action items on that improvement plan was to modify or revisit the multi-tiered system of support. And in this case, for us, it was our Strategies Offered for Success program. So with that recommendation, we modified it, as I said earlier, but more importantly, what this does is it allows the district to comply with the regulations when we're talking about referring students to special education. In a nutshell, the state is asking us to do everything you can and show evidence of that before we try to implement labels on students. So providing the assistance required, not providing the labels as our priority. What most of our staff and our parents understand is of their rights to refer a student to special education when there's trouble. But what most do not understand, the regulations requires our special education department to look at what evidence of what has been tried to help the student before we go into the process of applying labels. The byproduct of this SOS program is that it's a much more efficient use of our resources. It's very simple. Once you determine the problem and the pattern, then you can determine the most efficient and effective way to intervene and provide assistance. Continuing on in your booklet, there is a flow chart that outlines the process, and essentially, once the teacher has done all they can do in terms of helping a student with a problem or with an academic skill, this program allows that teacher opportunity to call on their professional colleagues for their opinion and their assistance in helping a student. Of course, the teacher or parent always has the right to refer to the special education process, but again, we have to defer to the regulations and requirements with looking at the interventions that have been tried. But this process simply lays out the scientific method. And the first point in the scientific method is looking at the data that's already there, what do we already know about the student, and then taking initial data on the student, measurement on the problem, and from that making a determination as to how we're going to help them. And the phrase that I've used for teachers and administrators is that once you find the problem, or find a pattern, you found a problem. Now we can research it and find the most effective way to address it. Continuing on in your work, in your booklet, there's an outline of the program, and it's very detailed from the moment the student presents some difficulty to referring to the support service team for possible evaluation of special education. If you turn 2 pages, you will see a sample of the referral form, which is another thing that we had to address in our action plan for the state in improving the referring process in Suffolk Public Schools. And this referral is called a request for assistance form, and it allows the referring source to clearly define what it is they feel that the student is having difficulty with. 2 pages later, you will see that there is a file review form which allows us to activate the first step of the scientific method, which is what do we already know? And this is information that's compiled from the student's records, so that when the team gathers, then it's all right there in front of them. And all of this information is utilized along with informal assessments on a specific skill in order to develop an intervention. You will find 4 pages later, it's called an SOS intervention plan. The intervention plan specifically lays out what is the concern, what was the initial measurement of the concern, and what is the goal? How do we expect that measurement to change once we apply our intervention? Then it actually lays out the intervention. What do we do to reteach the skill that's missing, that's getting in the way of success? And how do we plan to monitor that, and how frequently? And lastly, how we're going to motivate the change, and that's the reward system. And those are the components of the intervention plan. But more importantly, the last page of the plan, at the initial meeting, you decide right there with the parents right there when we're going to come back and meet again to determine whether or not this plan is working. And the recommendation is not at the end of the year, but it should be multiple reviews of the intervention plan and multiple measurements to determine its effectiveness. The following page is called the SOS follow-up meeting, and this page really just structured the meeting so that you're making decisions based on data alone, not subjective decisions based upon opinion. It compares your initial data, initial measurement of the concern, and looks at what the goal was of that concern, and then we're looking at current data. So when you compare those 3, you determine whether or not it's working or it's not, and this makes the decision about the next steps. You may very well now have the evidence you need to suspect a disability for referral for the special education process. Again, it's just more data to support what you believed in the first place. Following, you'll see examples of actual plans, both an academic and a behavioral example. But the last page is an example of the request for support service team review. This is the referral for what we used to know as a child study. And one of the things that the state recommended in our action plan was to identify what disability are you suspecting. You're coming to child study because you suspect the child is disabled. So if you have that suspicion, say what it is specifically, and that will help focus our meetings as well when we're discussing the child's concerns. And then in order to streamline it with the 504 process, we've included the requirement for 504 eligibility, because one of the things is it's not about just the impairment, but what life activity is being impaired or substantially limited because of this impairment. So everything is streamlined in this process to make, from the referral to get assistance to special ed or possible 504, is one even flow in terms of referral. And that's everything. Is there any questions you have for me? One of my babies. I'm the center so that Dr. Berg can be the closer.
I'd like to ask one question.
Yes, sir.
As I look through this, what's required for the team to meet on a child, there's a lot of paperwork required. And is that the responsibility of the teacher?
One of the goals is to begin the communication between the teacher and the parent. We're all on one team trying to help a student. So what we encourage is that teachers in an interview style fill out this form, or parents have they come in and they fill out the form as well. But it's really more useful when we start the dialogue between what the concerns really are and whether or not the teacher is seeing it, and if it's being seen at home, vice versa. So we're asking that this is done in collaboration and not just one person.
File review is done by the classroom teacher?
The file review is done by the classroom teacher. And I have to say that every school has developed their own procedures. So they have designated who's responsible for what portion of this process. In some schools, I know they submitted where it may be done by the guidance counselor who has access. I know there's a new power school that you'll be getting information on where a report can be pulled that we can figure out how to print it. All this information is there, and this form is not necessary because the form is not what's important, it's the information.
Let me just ask you, is this our way of implementing response to intervention that we would normally do for a child with a specific learning disability?
It is our way. This is response to intervention. It is our way of coming up with an effective intervention and then measuring that effectiveness. And that's exactly what this is. It's just structured in another way.
But I will say this, and I think Ms. Silver will agree, this obviously can be for any student, not a student that we anticipate may be eligible for special education. It just is a matter of that need. And I will say this, I commend the committee for streamlining the paperwork, because years ago it was a lot more as far as filling out these forms. Even though it's still a lot, but some of this information, obviously I think that when the teacher or whomever is filling it out, they'll be able to see just if there are any patterns, if there's something that I can do differently, or have I tried this, that, or the other. This is something that I would like for us to, we have talked about providing more of these for students who need them. When we talk about a student that for whatever reason may not be on a particular grade level, or perhaps was on borderline for retention, as he starts this new year, we should have a SOS plan in place for this particular student so he doesn't fall further behind.
Well, I like the fact that the students do not have to. We are looking at how they respond to different teaching, different methods, the project-based thing, when you were asking the question, Mr. Copeland, about projects and how children can show what they can do without the necessarily just how they perform with pencil and paper. So that's a good thing to see, and I would think that it would probably in the long run help to reduce the numbers of children who are actually referred for special education, when people can see from this information how well they respond to specific types of instruction and then act on that.
Interestingly enough, this has been my passion for years, that I do have measurement of buildings that I've worked in to see its effectiveness, and the number of referrals has reduced, a small percentage, but it's not about the number of referrals, it's about how relevant and how real the referrals are, because sometimes we're getting referrals for students who are not attending school, which doesn't say there's a disability, but it does say it's a problem. And the byproduct of all of this is that regardless of the reasons, parents are making these referrals because they want help. Special education is not always the help, but the biggest challenge is eliminating that paradigm, that belief that that's where help comes from. And this creates a team within each building where the students and the parents, everyone is pulled together to provide the assistance that students need, and not relying upon claiming a disability to get that.
Absolutely.
Even if you do have a disability, if you have the right help, you may not require special education.
You find buy-in from high school teachers?
High school has been the most difficult, only because there's so many that's involved in the student's educational day. The greatest thing that, now that I'm in high school this year, one of the things I'm working with the high school is to understand how each of them offer, as a team member, each of them offers something very unique in terms of information about a student. If it's a behavioral issue, we realize when we all sit down at the table to talk about one student that the behavior may not be occurring in every classroom. Well, that's valuable information. That's the information the teachers who are having difficulty need to know. So the greatest hurdle initially was getting a plan or a procedure, building procedure that was established that works in that setting, because it's easier with the elementary setting. But now that we have that in all of our high schools, now it's a matter of pulling in the buy-in and showing them, usually experience is the best educator, it's showing them how this works and that it can work as long as we're working on the same team and on one common goal to help a student in need.
So,
One of our biggest problems in the city here that we don't identify the students early enough, and they get to where they're going slower and we're not as pleased with them when they get there. I think my suggestion would be that we look at everybody by the end of the first grade, they've either bought into it or they're going into the regular program. I think that's something we ought to look at, and something we ought to maybe have a goal for, is by the end of the first grade, every first grader ought to be designated, well, not designated, but ought to be evaluated if there is a need.
The needs are all presented through patterns. So if we're seeing a pattern of discipline referrals, then most certainly it needs to be addressed. It is an issue. If there's a pattern of basic reading skills, then that needs to be addressed. So you're absolutely right. By first grade, students are already acclimated to the educational program, so that they can start presenting patterns that then we'll be able to recognize and address more effectively.
Or can we see our first grade teachers that they understand this and are aware of it, and they can bring it to the concerns of the committee or whatever is at the school site doing this program here?
Would like all the first grade to make that assessment?
I think if I may, what our teachers are oftentimes, the expectation is to teach responsively. So in other words, if we see that a student isn't mastering a skill or having trouble with a particular content area, what can I do differently? And that's where they're encouraged by either administration or whomever to meet with this group, possibly this group, to say, what can we do differently? And in some instances, they may very well have a formal plan such as this. In other instances, it might be, well, I'm just going to try to do this, which isn't a formal plan.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as addressing each student's needs, I think we do that, and I will continue to do that. But I do think that for some students that we see that are below grade level or having behavioral challenges, we do need this formal plan. So I do think it's something that can be addressed and something that can be implemented even more so as we continue to progress with this particular concept.
And the program also respects the level of understanding of each teacher. Some teachers may have it handled. If there are students who are working below grade level, although measurement shows that they have improved from an even lower level, then what we do encourage is put it in a plan so that the next teacher can continue the process that's making that growth.
That's critical to carry on, yeah.
Correct. And this process allows the support of teachers who may be limited. We all agree that we don't know all the answers, but this gives you a resource, and it gives you support and the knowledge to know that there are people in the building who are there to help you, and you don't need to struggle, just like our teachers, that no one is alone in this.
I would think it would be, I know it would be kind of, for those students who are not having difficulty, the process would not be necessary because
Correct.
their learning in the regular classroom setting without any kinds of different things to do.
Correct.
Just regular differentiated instruction to keep them interested and engaged.
That's exactly
But
what it is.
this is for those children who demonstrate that they are falling behind for whatever reason. They don't understand what is going on, and they're not grasping and holding on to what's going on in the classroom.
Correct.
Over.
Thank you.
Our last presentation is online opportunities throughout our school division. I'm going to call to the podium Dr. Stanette Bird, our Director of Secondary Leadership. And this begins on page 12 in your packet.
Thank you, Dr. Whitney, and greetings to members of the board. This online opportunities presentation is broken into two parts. The first is Power School. I won't go too much in depth on this because Mr. Edwards, during your retreat, went through quite a bit of this program, but I do want to highlight some of the greatest benefits of it. And one is the online assessment. Power School allows us to create and administer assessments online, and by doing that we can view results and make decisions for how to improve student growth instantly by having that immediate feedback. The other piece that Power School offers us is the analytics. All of our data is organized in a central location. As a principal or a teacher, I can look at a student, and in one place I can see their SOL scores, benchmark scores, MAP scores, all of this information in one place. We can also look at longitudinal data, so I can see how the student has progressed over a period of time because it is all housed in one location. And from that, that will help us to determine what type of intervention and remediation that we would offer the student. So once again, this is just a brief recap about Power School that was mentioned earlier at your board retreat. If you remember in August, when I came to the podium to talk about eSchool, that was when we decided that we were going to postpone, I'm sorry, not eSchool, Edgenuity was when we decided we were going to postpone that meeting until this time. So over the next 3 slides, you're going to see a video about Edgenuity. I'm going to describe the implementation process, and then finally talk about how the program is managed and will be evaluated. The video is about 8 minutes, but I'm going to stop it at about 4 minutes in. I think it is important for you to know what Edgenuity is all about. When you hear teachers and students talking about Edgenuity, to really have an understanding of it, and I think this is going to be the best way to get that across.
Welcome to Edgenuity, where learning clicks. Now, logging into Edgenuity is easy. Just enter your username and your password at learn.edgenuity.com/student. Once you've logged in, your course list appears here in the lobby. Here you can also check new messages, including chat and email, and you can also view any new announcements. To access a course, just click its title. Once you've selected a course, you can view your progress right here. And if you're on track, your progress will appear in blue. If you're ahead, you'll see your progress in green. But if you see your progress shown in red, it means you've fallen behind. You'll need to put in some extra time to get caught up. You can also view your overall grade. Notice that this student has an overall grade of 87.5%. That means he has a B+ on the work he has completed so far. Pretty good. But remember that this student is behind, so his actual grade takes that into account. Your actual grade factors in zeros for any activities you should have completed by now and haven't. If you're behind, your actual grade will always be lower than your overall grade. So you'll want to put in some extra time and get back on target to bring your actual grade back up. Now we're ready to jump into a lesson. For whatever course is selected, your current lesson and next activity are shown here. To get started, you can click Next Activity, or you can go to the course map. The course map shows you the entire structure of your course. Most activities will show up here as grayed out and locked unless your teacher has allowed you to move freely throughout the course. To To work on any activity that's unlocked, click the activity title. This activity is a warm-up or introduction. Let's take a look.
Hi, I'm your instructor. Well, take a look at this drawing.
This activity starts with a video. You can pause and rewind the video at any time using the video controls here. If you've already watched the video the whole way through once, you can fast forward to the part you want to see again. However, you can't fast forward through any video segment you haven't watched yet. You do need to watch every video once all the way through. You can control the volume here. And you can turn captions on here. It's important to know that most of the important information you'll be tested on will be taught here in the videos. So pay attention and take good notes. You'll find your e-notes or digital notebook here. You can take notes at any time. Pause the video if you want to, or if you're a fast typist, you can take notes while the teacher is talking. Once you add a note to your notebook, you can go back and edit it if you need to. Just click the note and it'll appear in the e-notes text box. Edit your note and click Save. Now you may find that you want to add more to your notes. In advanced mode, you can use formatting tools like tables, an equation editor, a symbol palette, and bulleted lists. You can even spell check your notes. We find that students who take notes tend to do better on quizzes and tests. Taking the time to write down the important ideas in your own words will help you process and remember what you learn. So use your e-notes. Another helpful tool is the glossary, found on this second tab. All the vocabulary words for the lesson will appear here, but you can also look up any word you want. To go back to the lesson word list, just close the word lookup window. The third tab contains a transcript of the current activity. You can view this transcript in English, or you can translate it into any supported language, as long as you have the translation enabled. Just open the transcript and select your language here. Sometimes the video will pause, and you'll be asked to complete a task. On any task, you can use the tools in your toolbar. In math and science courses, you can use the built-in calculators to solve problems. Depending on the course, you might have access to a standard calculator, a graphing calculator, or other specialized calculators. In any course, you can highlight text. This can help you pay attention as you read, especially when you're asked to read extended articles and stories. If you have Read Aloud enabled, you can hear text read aloud. Just highlight what you want to hear and press the Read Aloud button.
The runner travels.
If you have translation enabled, you can change the languages of most on-screen text here. Some of these languages also work with the Read Aloud tool, so try it out.
Il grafico mostra la distanza.
All right, so that's just a brief introduction to some of the benefits of the program. Certainly, if you're interested in viewing the entire thing, I can provide that link for you. The implementation process, we used several programs in the past, such as Odyssey, D2L, NovaNet, and some Virtual Virginia, and we were able to meet the needs of all of those different programs with this one tool called Edgenuity. When we purchased the product, we were provided with 7 professional development days where a person came and provided PD to our teachers. We've used 5 of those 7 days already. Our first process of implementing the program was with summer school this past summer. We had over 450 students using the program during the summertime. And the average time was about 7.5 active hours on the program, which that doesn't account for a student who may pause the video, write on their notes, do some studying, and then restart it again. So it just shows that the students were engaged in that program during that period of time. Other current uses of the program, even though our attempt is to do a slow rollout so that we don't overwhelm administrators and teachers with all of the benefits of this robust program. We are using it currently for credit recovery. Students who did not pass a course they can use Edgenuity to try to recover that credit, so it's being used that way. SOL prep, students who may have not experienced success or SOL test or are planning to take an SOL test. There is an SOL test prep course for many of the SOL tested subjects. Also, GED prep. There is a course in Edgenuity that our GED students are using to prepare for the test. Blended learning. A teacher at any time can go through the modules that are within this program and pull a segment out. As the lady who was on the video explaining that concept, that teacher can just, whole group, pull up Edgenuity, have that video played to the student, and have a discussion about it. So that can take place at any time. Also within our blended learning, we're required to have students are required to take a virtual, have experience with a virtual course. So we use this as well through all of our PE 9 and 10. And lastly, we do have some cases where students are taking this for initial credit. In other words, they have not taken the course at all. This is their first time, but they are using Edgenuity to take that course. All right, next slide, talk a little bit about program management. We have an e-learning coach that is in place in all 3 of the high schools. That person is also the graduation coach. In addition to those 2 responsibilities, they also support any e-learning that takes place at the middle schools as well. So a middle school teacher who may be using Edgenuity in a blended environment, if they have a question or want to review a report, there is a person that is available to assist them. So our e-learning coach, we've currently been meeting every 2 weeks as this is a new program. During that time, we monitor reports. We talk about how we're going to advise teachers as well as how we're going to advise administrators. We are very aware of students who are not progressing as well as classrooms in which students are not progressing. And those e-learning coaches can meet one-on-one with those teachers to help them make some adjustments to their classroom instruction. In addition, our e-learning coaches have made presentations to the staffs of the high school and middle schools about some of the features and opportunities for blended learning. Lastly, students enter into a contract when they go into this. It's a face-to-face meeting where the parent comes in and the student, and they sit down with the e-learning coach and they talk about the tips that are going to help students be successful in this program. They watch the video just as you have watched today, but they also agree that they are going to stay on a certain pace. And as the video mentioned, once a student falls behind, for example, at the 9 weeks mark, they should be 25% through with the program. So if they are at 10%, they are behind. They're not progressing the way they need to. That contract outlines exactly what will happen. A phone call takes place by our e-learning coach, and the student could be removed from the program if they're not taking full advantage of it. And the last role of the e-learning coaches, they actually facilitate a class as well. So they're not just advising teachers and administrators on how to use the program. They have personal experience with the program as well. All right, at this time, I will answer any questions you may have.
You have one of the things that could be eliminated is possibly virtual Virginia. Does Edgenuity have AP courses in it?
Yes, Edgenuity has AP courses. It is NCAA approved. We have various courses. Virtual Virginia, in terms of going away, I didn't want to imply that that's not still an option for our students, because that is still an option.
Work into the structure of the day for the student as far as the class is concerned.
Who's using an Edgenuity student?
Well, if he wants to take a class that he didn't pass an SOL in, how does he do that in the structure of the class day?
Okay, so we have several options for students. One is a student who is a senior, for example. They may have enough credits such that they have an open block, which they can just be in an Edgenuity class. So that's an opportunity for them to go to the lab and work on this course during that open block. We also still have Z block, which is a period of time after school, where a student who has a full schedule of 7 classes can come after school and take advantage of this online opportunity. Excuse me? Oh, not only during lunch, but also at home. We've opened up the door
At home
for,
as well.
yes, we've opened up the door now through this program where learning can take place at the home. Yes, so
Is there a measurement of how many hours they spend in this program or not? Is it just measured by what they achieve or learn in the program?
yes, it is. It tracks active hours. So if a student is on there and they're playing a video and they walk away from it, the video segments, as you saw, are about 5 to 8 minutes. So if they were to watch a video, walk away, come back 30 minutes later, the computer registers that, at the end of that 8-minute section, they should have been progressing and doing more in the program. So yes, it monitors that active time. And those are some of the reports that we look at, individual student reports. How much...
Graduation coaches are well aware of these programs, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Great.
The other attractive piece to this is that it extends beyond just that student who needs credit recovery. Our students who are a part of the governor's school, they go over to Norfolk, they can also take classes that they may not be physically here to take if they need a particular credit or want a particular class as well. So it really stretches across the entire student population, or has the potential to do that.
So, question. So if you have a student who maybe is a senior and or part way between junior and senior, and they need maybe 12th grade English, and we've had cases like that in PPC where some of them are in between grades or whatever, so they could be working on several of those courses like that for credit.
They could, I think, and Dr. Berg, please intervene if necessary. It's looked at very carefully whether or not it's appropriate for this particular student, and we're also looking at the number of credits that he's taken. So we don't want to overburden the student or allow them to say, I can take more than what we think might be acceptable. Is there any?
That's exactly right. So even with the Z block class, students have an opportunity to complete 2 additional courses during that period if they can complete one first semester and second semester, but we don't assign both courses at that time because we know that students learn in different ways, and for some students this online environment isn't conducive to their style, and so we don't want to mislead anyone by letting them think they need 8 courses and they're going to graduate. But we do tell them, if you work hard during the Z block time and you're able to complete this course, you can even use time at home to work on, waiting for the bus, and you're progressing, then you complete the course, then yes, we'll have a discussion about adding an additional one for you.
Do you have enough technology to support the program for more students?
There's so many different benefits to the program. So, for example, I mentioned the classroom teacher who can use it as a whole group. So, they have the projector in their classroom. They can project up there. So, if you're talking about like one-on-one right now, I can't remember exactly how many tablet devices are in the high school. I don't know. I don't want to put Mr. Littlefield on the spot, but our students should be able to, the majority of them should be able to check out tablets should they choose and take on that responsibility.
Questions for Dr. Bird? Thank you, Dr. Bird. Well, I realize that we thought that perhaps these would be 15 minutes apiece, but they were very interesting topics, and we're glad that we were able to give you the information as far as where we are with a number of activities, a number of programs that we're using. I will say this to you, that these programs are not necessarily new for this year, so I don't want anyone to leave thinking that teachers are or introduced all of these new things for this particular year. In some instances, it's just a matter of us wanting to highlight how we have moved towards implementing these programs, where we are with these programs. We're always revisiting and looking at them to seeing what changes we can make to improve the programs, but more importantly, making certain that it's helping our students perform and work to his or her potential.
We'll have the personnel report, and it's 6 o'clock, student, pupil personnel report at 6:15. Okay, personnel report, 6 o'clock. Yeah, we're gonna.
Motion is needed to go into a closed meeting to discuss the following items and subjects pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia 1950 as amended. Number one, the discussion and/or consideration of the personnel report and related information. Number two, the discussion and/or consideration of the pupil personnel report and related information. Number three, the discussion or consideration of the disposition of real property for a public purpose, where the discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body, and more specifically, the granting of a 20-foot wide utility construction easement along the eastern boundary of the Mount Zion Elementary School to the city of Suffolk in order to construct and operate a sanitary sewer force main serving the adjacent Virginia Regional Commerce Park. And number four, consultation with legal counsel employed by the school board regarding a specific legal matter requiring the provision of legal advice by counsel, and more specifically, to discuss the terms and conditions of a memorandum of understanding between the Suffolk City School Board and the Isle of Wight School Board for determining the fair market value of the Prudence Center, where the discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating posture of the school board. And number five, consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members regarding a specific legal matter requiring the provision of legal advice by counsel, and more specifically to discuss the terms and conditions of a memorandum of understanding between the Suffolk City School Board and the Board of Education regarding school accreditation, where the discussion in an open meeting will adversely affect the negotiating posture of the school board. All of which is authorized by Section 2.2-3711, 1, 2, 3, and 7 of the Code of Virginia 1950 as amended.